So last time we were together, we were starting a series, section on Daniel chapter 2, a study on Daniel chapter 2. We're going to go through a really quick review since the last week, because of the tropical storm, the last week has felt like a month pretty much. So let's go back 2 weeks ago. We're going to talk about what we talked about here in church. Nebuchadnezzar was a cruel pagan king. He was ruthless. He was not one of the guys that you would want to be best friends with, or if you crossed him, he would probably kill you. Like, it's that kind of, he had severe anger issues, and he had no problem really with killing anyone just because they couldn't do what he asked them to do. We saw that with the wise men. They didn't tell him the dream, something that was impossible for any person to do, and he was like, well, kill them all. But this man, this pagan, cruel man, was the man that God chose to give a prophetic dream to. God showed up to work where you would least expect it. This wasn't somebody that you would expect God to speak through. But he didn't really understand God. He didn't really know who God was or how God worked. And so God brought Daniel into his life to be able to help him understand what was going on. God showed Daniel the dream and the interpretation, which we're going to be looking at shortly, that portion of it. But Nebuchadnezzar was still a pagan guy who worshipped other gods. That's who he was. Daniel was faithful to God. Now, a lot of times when we use the word faithful, being faithful to God, and people will use the stories like in Daniel chapter 2 or other parts of the Bible, and they're like, these men, these women are faithful to God. We need to be faithful just like them. And that's true. That's very true. But oftentimes what they mean, or at least demonstrate with their personal life, is that we need to be faithful to God in doing what we believe is right, but at the expense of relationships and people around us. There's no regard for what other people think around us when people that believe differently than us. And that leads to many faithful, quote unquote, faithful Christians who are being rude, blunt, insensitive when sharing their faith, when sharing what they believe with others, because that's because they believe differently than them, because they believe that standing up for truth is more important than anything else. But Daniel set the example of that being faithful to God is not just being faithful to do what he says, but also to be faithful representatives as you're doing what he says, being faithful representatives of his character to everyone that you're interacting with and talking to. God might bring someone across your path that doesn't quite look like they're really somebody that God would speak to, like a Nebuchadnezzar kind of a person. And that love and tactfulness that you show them and how you speak to them and how you interact with them may actually open them up to being willing to listen to more of what God has in store for them. You're there as a Christian to point them faithfully to Jesus, to point them to him, first through your character and then through your actions. If you have the actions first and the character doesn't match, they're not going to be interested in it. Daniel, and this is where it's interesting, Daniel prioritized the relationships with the people he had around him in the pagan court, people that were even unbelievers, over his own convictions, but he did it in a way that did not compromise his convictions. Does that make sense? He did it in a way that did not compromise his beliefs or compromise his faithfulness to God. But the way he lived those beliefs, the way he talked to people about those beliefs, it was a way that actually opened them up to God being able to work in their lives as well. Now, before Daniel told the king the dream, he prefaced what he was going to say with the verses that we're about to read. Daniel chapter 2, if you want to go ahead and turn there. We're going to be in verse 27. Daniel 2, verse 27. Daniel wanted to make sure that the king knew that this dream that he was about to tell and interpret for the king was not because of some special power that he had in and of himself. It wasn't something that he had the ability to tell dreams like he thought that the wise men had. But the only way that Daniel could do this was because God had showed him this dream. God had given him the interpretation. The God that had given Nebuchadnezzar the dream would actually give this interpretation and understanding to Daniel. Daniel wanted the king to be very sure of this. Verse 27, Daniel answered the king, "No wise man, medium, magician, or diviner is able to make known to the king the mystery he asked about. But there is a God in heaven who reveals mysteries, and he has let King Nebuchadnezzar know what will happen in the last days. Your dream and the visions that you came into your mind as you lay in bed were these. Your Majesty, while you were in bed, thoughts came to your mind about what will happen in the future, and the revealer of mysteries has let you know what will happen. As for me, this mystery has been revealed to me, not because I have more wisdom than anyone living, but in order that the interpretation might be made known to the king, that you may understand the thoughts of your mind." A pagan king, wondering what's going to happen in the future, and God, who this king knows nothing about, comes down and says, "I'm going to help you out. I'm going to help you understand this." Notice that Daniel points out that it's going to let King Nebuchadnezzar know what will happen in the last days. It's apparently something that the king had been giving a lot of thought to recently. I don't know if he maybe realized that he was getting old and that maybe his dynasty of kings or whatever it was called back then might not last as long. He was hoping that it could draw it out like every king, that your kingdom was going to stay forever. But God was trying to communicate something really important to Nebuchadnezzar to guide him to realize something very important that had much more far-reaching implications than just his local kingdom or just his personal life. So let's go ahead and dive into the dream. Verse 31. Your Majesty, as you were watching, suddenly a colossal statue appeared. That statue, tall and dazzling, was standing in front of you, and its appearance was terrifying. The head of the statue was pure gold, its chest and arms were silver, its stomach and thighs were bronze, its legs were iron, and its feet were partly iron and partly fired clay. As you were watching, a stone broke off without a hand touching it, struck the statue on its feet of iron and fired clay, and crushed them. Then the iron, the fired clay, the bronze, the silver, the gold were shattered and became like chaff from the summer threshing floors. The wind carried them away, and not a trace of them could be found. But the stone that struck the statue became a great mountain and filled the whole earth. It's a pretty simple dream, especially to those of us who might have heard this a dozen times over our lifetime. But it was a really strange dream. It says it was terrifying to the king. He didn't understand what it all meant, but just looking at this statue somehow terrified him. He knew it was a very strange thing. Nobody had probably seen a statue, and I don't think this was what terrified him, but nobody had probably ever seen a statue with all of these different metals in it. It's really hard to make these metals stick together in the way that they were and make it look anything decent. But then this stone comes out, this massive rock comes out that hasn't been cut out without hands, and just poof, and the statue's gone, like you see the dust flying away in the wind. I can imagine at this point, the king is sitting on the edge of his throne, or wherever he was, as all of this is coming back to him. This was the dream. This is what I saw. This is actually what I saw. But what does it mean? It's so confusing. This is so strange. There's nothing that this connects to. And so he goes right into it. In verse 36, he dives right into the interpretation. We're going to take it little bit by bit. Verse 36, this was the dream. Now we will tell the king its interpretation. Your Majesty, you are King of Kings. The God of the heavens has given you sovereignty, power, strength, and glory. Wherever people live, or wild animals, or birds of the sky, he has handed them all over to you and will make you ruler over them all. You are the head of gold. Now, if the king had even been thinking anything remotely similar to this, he probably would have completely agreed with that statement, because of course he's the head of gold. They were a very valuable nation, and he was at the head. He was the leader of all nations. He was the King of Kings. There was no one else that was more important or stronger than he was. But then Daniel throws this other part into it, that the God of heaven has given you this sovereignty, power, and the list of other things. It sounds similar if you go back into Genesis and read what God told Adam, right, when he was beginning to right when he was giving him the dominion over the earth and over the animals and everything. It's a very similar wording to what's in Genesis. What God wanted Nebuchadnezzar to know is, Nebuchadnezzar, you are king, but only because I gave you the power and the ability to be where you are today. It's not because of anything that you have done. It's because of who I am, and I've given you this power and strength that enables you to be in the position that you're in. Even if somebody doesn't acknowledge God, and this is really important as we're looking through the different parts of the world, the different politics and the different leaders within the church, the different leaders within the secular world as well, that even if somebody doesn't acknowledge God, or even if somebody is fighting against God, somehow God can still use them. God can still work through them to accomplish things that otherwise would not be able to be accomplished. But the other thing that God wanted him to know is Babylon's not going to last forever. You're just the head. There's another medal that's coming. And from history we know that Nebuchadnezzar's rule started around 605 BC, but it was conquered by another kingdom just a few years later in 539 BC. In verse 39, Daniel chapter 2, after you there will arise another kingdom inferior to yours, and then another, a third kingdom of bronze, which will rule the whole earth. Each of these medals represents a different kingdom, but who was this kingdom? In verse 39, Daniel 2 doesn't say what it is. It doesn't explain it. Nebuchadnezzar doesn't know who this kingdom is that's going to come. But if we look at back in history, we also can find the answer in Daniel as well. If you turn over to Daniel chapter 5, Daniel chapter 5, we see in verse 28 that the kingdom of Babylon was, and we'll be going through this chapter in Daniel 5 a little bit in a few weeks, but in verse 28 it says that the kingdom, talking about the kingdom of Babylon, has been divided and given to who? The Medes and the Persians. So this next medal is going to be the Medes and the Persians, according to this in Daniel chapter 5. And there's another one that we'll be seeing a little bit later that also points to that as well later on in Daniel. But according to history, this Medo-Persian Empire, after it conquered Babylon, it ruled from 539 to around 331 BC until, just as God said, another kingdom came up behind it. And again, Daniel 2 doesn't explain what this kingdom of bronze is. It was just going to be another kingdom that would happen. But if you look at later chapters in Daniel, again, this same progression of kingdoms is repeated multiple times in different visions, sometimes with expanded understanding, expanded details in visions that Daniel had. And in Daniel 8, this time Daniel sees a vision that terrifies him. There is a two-horned ram, just for short, there's a two-horned ram that's charging in every direction, west, north, south, and conquering everything in its path. And then there's a male goat with a big horn between his eyes. It comes flying from the west, not even touching the ground. He's moving so fast with his big horn right between his eyes, smashes into the ram, tramples it to bits, and the ram is gone. But you fast forward down to Daniel 8, verse 20. It explains exactly what's happening here. Daniel 8, verse 20. This two-horned ram that you saw represents the kings of Media and Persia, the two horns. And this Media and Persia we know is the kingdom of silver. The shaggy goat represents the king of Greece, and the large horn between its eyes represents the first king. It can't be any clearer than that. This next kingdom, and if you look in history, this matches very very clearly with what Daniel was saying here. Alexander the Great, the king of the Greek Empire, led Greece on a conquering spree. After a little bit, they had conquered all the way from Egypt and Palestine, all the way over to Persia, and even as far as India. It was a massive swath of land that they conquered in a very short period of time. And Greek language and culture spread out over that area and is still, it's affecting our culture today as well. It's an integral part of of a lot of areas of the world. Interestingly enough, Greece was known for its use of bronze in its armor and in its money, and as well the armor that the soldiers wore was bronze armor. As time went by, if you notice, let's go back to Daniel chapter 2. As time went by, Each metal getting stronger or is it getting weaker? Well, the metals are getting stronger, they're getting harder, but the kingdoms are getting inferior. So the strength of the nation and the spread of the nation is representing this the hardness and the toughness of the metal. We're going to see in the Iron Kingdom, we're going to see that. But the Greek Empire lasted from 331 to 168, and it said there was going to be another kingdom. In verse 40, a fourth kingdom will be as strong as iron. For iron crushes and shatters everything, and like iron that smashes, it will crush and smash all the others. This is going to be the strongest kingdom of all. But if you look back at after Babylon, it says that the next kingdoms are going to be inferior to the one before. This kingdom was strong as iron. You saw the feet, partly of potter's fired clay and partly of iron. It will be a divided kingdom, though some of the strength of iron will be in it. The history clearly documents, again, that the kingdom of Rome conquered Greece, many other smaller countries and kingdoms along with it. And Rome was also known for its extensive use, more than any of the previous kingdoms, for its extensive use of iron and a lot of different things. But they also developed a highly advanced political system. Some of the principles of that political system we use in democracies today as well. They weren't exactly a democracy, but a lot of the policies were, they maintained peace throughout the kingdom. Sometimes with brutality, but they maintained the peace of the entire nation so that it didn't end up rebelling. This political power of Rome lasted for about 500 years until 476 AD, around there, when Rome fell to barbarian invasions. And this is the next part of the vision that we started, the dream that we started reading. If you notice, this is not a new metal. It's a mix in with something of before. It's iron legs. You go into the feet, you'd expect to see either completely different metal or just iron. But there's a mix in of this clay. And I don't have time to go into all of there's a lot of really interesting things that this represents. But looking at it very simply today for time, the Roman Empire fell apart into shambles. Lots of different nations and tribes came out of it. It turned into a lot of disunited tribes at the time, barbarians, that spread out throughout all of Europe and beyond as well. And it says in let's keep reading in verse 42, you saw the iron mixed with clay, and that the toes of the feet were partly iron and partly fired clay. Part of the kingdom will be strong, and part will be brittle. You saw the iron mixed with clay. The peoples will mix with one another, but will not hold together, just as iron does not mix with fired clay. You know, we see people trying to do this still today, but ever since then, there's been dictators and political leaders that have tried without success. They've made a little bit of success and then it falls apart, but they keep trying to unite all of the kingdoms of Europe and all the kingdoms of the world into one united government, one united alliance, so to speak. They're trying to form political alliances, religious alliances across the entire world, but God says in regards to these political alliances that they'll mix with one another. They'll be mixed in amongst each other, but they will not hold together. From this point on, there's not going to be another worldwide kingdom of earthly political kingdoms. You know, if the dream ended there, it might be a little bit discouraging. You see all these strong kingdoms and the world expanding. Each kingdom that comes along becomes stronger and stronger. Each kingdom becomes a little bit inferior in some ways. But there's that stone that comes that smashes that image. Now, at first, that might not seem like a very positive thing. Where is it going? Where are these kingdoms going? It's just this massive stone. In verse 44, in the days of those kings, the God of heaven will set up a kingdom that will never be destroyed. This kingdom will not be left to another people. It will crush all those kingdoms and bring them to an end, but will itself endure forever. You saw a stone break off from the mountain without a hand touching it. It crushed the iron, the bronze, the fired clay, the silver, and the gold. The great God has told the king what will happen in the future. The dream is certain, its interpretation reliable. God showed Nebuchadnezzar what he knew was going to happen in the big picture of things all throughout history up until the very end. But he also made it clear to Nebuchadnezzar that he was actively working in it. Just as he gave him the power to be in the position he was in, he was actively working through history as these kingdoms would be coming down the pipeline, so to speak. But where are we now? We're in the feet. We're right down at the very bottom. Rome was destroyed in 476 as far as the big political empire of Rome. But we're down in the feet where this division and all of this is going on. But the encouraging thing, the hope that we have, is the very next thing that we see coming down is this stone. And it's been a good number of years since Rome lost its power, the global power that it had. That means that God is coming back very soon. Every day it's a little bit sooner. He's coming back to set up his kingdom that's not going to be temporary like all of these other kingdoms, not going to be temporary like all the political powers that we see right now even. Not all of the alliances that people are trying to build is not going to be temporary like those. It's going to be a permanent kingdom. It's going to be it's going to be an eternal kingdom, a kingdom where God is king and everyone respects and loves him. It's going to be an amazing place. The only kingdom that will last forever, God was telling Nebuchadnezzar, the only kingdom that lasts forever is the kingdom of the God that gave you the ability to rule temporarily right now. If you keep reading on, Nebuchadnezzar recognized that Daniel's God, he called him God of gods. He's the God of all the gods that Nebuchadnezzar, stronger, more powerful, more incredible than all the gods that Nebuchadnezzar had and believed in, that he hadn't been able to give him what he needed. And he also acknowledged him of Lord of kings. Lord as his Lord, his king in a way, his master. God is intimately involved. Even among those who don't believe in him, even among those who don't have a connection with him, he's actively involved in the lives of everyone in this world. Whether you're leaders or whether you're anyone else, he's actively involved in everyone's life. Even if it doesn't look like it, even if it seems hopeless, he's there. He's working in a way that you can't imagine. I have a few lessons that we can learn from this. Number one, focus on this eternal kingdom. Are you more focused on the temporary politics of the world than you should be? I know this whole thing with the tropical storm coming through and losing cell phone and internet and electricity and stuff, I think Marcia mentioned, it was very freeing of not, like I came back after I think it was 4 or 5 days when we were able to go up to Spartanburg to get a little bit of cell phone connection, and I saw a few news items and it just revolted me. Like, it's normal stuff that's going on that we got used to, but it was just so different from everything else. It's just that short little time. But are we focused more on the temporary politics of this world than we should be? As followers of Christ, our focus shouldn't be on building up the things around us. This can be on political powers, it can be on financial security, it can be on the friends that we have, personal achievements, whatever. They look differently in everyone's life. We cannot afford to get distracted by things that are only temporary. Almost everything in this life, except the things that connect to God and the things that connect others to God. Everything else is temporary. And we put all of our focus into it sometimes. It's easy to get distracted by these things when it's important to put enough in there, enough focus in it so that we're not homeless and whatnot, but our focus should be preparing for the kingdom that God is setting up, investing in people and spreading the gospel. We may claim to be Christians, but do we prioritize it like we're Christians? Do we prioritize our convictions at the expense of someone else's salvation? This can happen in religious beliefs, this can happen in political beliefs, of losing, and there's so much that you see across Facebook and other places of people talking about their political beliefs, and people are willing to lose friendships over things that are temporary. They're willing to destroy relationships with others because of their belief or political support or politically being against a specific person or policy. It's only temporary in the big scheme of things. Second thing is trust in God's ability to work through people, even if it seems like it's impossible for him to be working there. Just think of someone in politics right now. Think of someone it doesn't have to be in politics, somebody that you know of that's in the world that you have extreme disagreements with, that is even doing something anti-biblical, anti-Christian, just like Nebuchadnezzar. God's working in their life. God's somehow working through them. You're just not able to see it yet. We see that God is sovereign over every kingdom and every leader throughout history. That they have that power because he allows them to have that power. He doesn't cause them to do the evil things, but he can remove them just as easily as he can allow them to have the power that he has. We can be confident that God is still in control today. Even though the world seems chaotic and uncertain, he still knows what's going on. He still knows the people who are his. He's still working in the lives of people who don't believe in him and still drawing them closer to him. Are you completely focused on God's kingdom, or are you more focused on temporary kingdoms? Now, God needs us to learn how to prioritize our relationships. I keep mentioning this, but we need to learn how to, without compromising the things that we believe in, communicate these things to people in a way that draws them closer to Jesus, not pushes them away, just like Daniel did. Focus on God's kingdom that will last forever. Now, we've seen firsthand this week exactly how uncertain our lives can be, how quickly things can change. Overnight, literally overnight. We never dreamed that something like this would happen, and it's overnight. This whole part of the country is completely different. When Hurricane Helene came barreling its way up through Florida and across Georgia, South Carolina, North Carolina, and even into Tennessee and a little bit beyond that as well. But North Carolina, it got hit particularly hard, as we know. And there's power that's still out. People here don't have power yet. This is 9 days after the storm. And people in North Carolina and some other places, even here in South Carolina, they don't know when the power is going to be turning back on. It's just complete and total destruction. Tens of thousands of people are without water. They're still searching for people, looking for people in this disaster, trying to recover, trying to still get into neighborhoods that they don't even know how the people are doing in there. No one in this area ever expected anything at all close to this. And it's heartbreaking to see this suffering. I mentioned a little bit earlier, but seeing on the news places that I grew up going to, seeing pictures of the county that I grew up in, with all the destruction and people's houses washed away and so much that has been changed. All around the world, disasters, wars, they seem to be picking up. We see a war in the Middle East right now that seems to be rapidly gaining in momentum. All these things we know from the Bible that they're going to be increasing in frequency and destructive power. And it's easy to get sucked into all of the terrible things going on around us and get pulled down by all of that suffering that we see and forget that we're at the end of the world. We're nearing the end of the world. That this is all part of a sign as these things continue to increase. Yes, they've been increasing for a long time, but it's getting worse. And the more time goes on, we know that the coming of God is so much sooner. I want to take a little side note here, but directly connected to this. If you're feeling anxious or heartbroken about what you're personally experiencing, whether it's the anxiety of being without power or the anxiety of things that your friends or family members are going through, whether it's related to this storm or otherwise, it's okay to hurt. It's easy in a time like this, and I've caught myself doing this too, of just constantly reminding, well, other people have it worse. That's good to remember and to be thankful that we don't have it as bad as other people, but that doesn't lessen what you're going through and what you went through, what your friends are going through, what you see all around you. It's okay to be hurting without downplaying the hurt that you're going through, while also hurting for the people who have lost so much more than you. Mentally, emotionally, sometimes physically, but it can be really hard, and it has been really hard for a lot of people, but it's okay to feel that way as you're processing everything that happened or everything that's going on, still ongoing, as we're seeing all of this come across the news as well and in our neighborhoods. See, God showed Nebuchadnezzar exactly what would happen down through the end of time, through major kingdoms all throughout history, and everything has happened exactly as the Bible records. The very next thing that has come, and everything else has been true, so we have no reason to doubt that the next thing that's coming is this stone that's cut out without hands. This eternal kingdom of God that is never going to pass away. We have hope because if you turn with me to Revelation 21, this is what this eternal kingdom will be like, that we are looking toward, that we are excited for in the midst of all of this suffering that we've been touched with personally here, that we've been touched close by greater suffering around us. This is what we have to look forward to in Revelation 21. This is what that kingdom of the stone cut out without hands is going to be like. Revelation 21, verse 3. Then I heard a loud voice from the throne. Look, God's dwelling is with humanity. He will live with them. They will be his peoples. And God himself will be with them and will be their God. He will wipe every tear from their eyes. Death will be no more. Grief, crying, pain, they'll be no more, because the previous things have passed away. That entire statue, everything that's connected with all the temporary things in the world right now is going to be completely gone, poofed, like chaff, dust being blown away by the wind. And it's going to be replaced by a world like this, with Jesus living with us, wiping away our tears. No more pain, no more suffering, no more disasters, no more struggle of hurt and heartache, of seeing the things going on around us. Are you serious to prepare for this eternal kingdom? God showed this Nebuchadnezzar this dream so that he could know what would happen in the last days. And this dream is in the Bible so that we can know what will happen in the last days. And know that this is about to happen. It's preparing us to be faithful to God, growing in our faithfulness to the God of this eternal kingdom, but not just in our things that we do, but our faithfulness in representing his character to those around us as we are living out the things he has told us to do. And I know I asked this question earlier, but I want to ask it again. Are you too serious about the temporary things of this world? The finances, the politics, all of the news, the people, the leaders, many other things. The list could go on. Are you too seriously invested in these things that maybe you're losing a little bit of sight of the importance of this eternal kingdom that's coming? If you realize that this is you, that you are too much invested, turn to God. Ask him to help you to show you how to shift those priorities. Ask him to show you if your priorities need to shift and how that can look in your life. God wants us to be there in his eternal kingdom, and he wants us to learn to trust him, just as he was trying to get Nebuchadnezzar to learn to trust him as well.